Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. A frozen land of forgotten ruins ***. The winds of the desolate desert howled like a chorus of vengeful spirits. Frozen grains of sand whipped across the barren landscape, scouring the once proud structures that had long since succumbed to the relentless passage of time. A vast sea of cracked stone stretched out for miles, the remnants of a once thriving city, now abandoned, its glory buried beneath centuries of ice and snow. The sky above was a dull, gray mass, heavy with the oppressive weight of a storm that never seemed to end. Amidst this eternal winter, a figure stirred. The alien Queen Mother, once the revered and feared ruler of her people, now lay broken and alone on the frigid surface. Her massive, segmented body trembled from the cold, her normally regal carapace cracked and scarred from the violent crash that had brought her to this forsaken world. Her wings, vast and iridescent, had been reduced to little more than mangled remnants. Her antennae, so keen and perceptive in the past, drooped uselessly beside her head. She had been tracking a warlord from another star system, a power-hungry conqueror who had invaded her territory. But her ship had been sabotaged, sent spiraling into the frozen wasteland with no hope of escape. The last of her crew had perished in the crash, leaving her stranded and helpless, far from the nearest friendly world. Her species, a hive-mind civilization, thrived on strength and unity, and without her presence, the hive was in chaos. She had no way of knowing if her people had fallen or were even still fighting for survival. She had fought against the cold, against the searing pain in her body for days. But her strength was failing. The temperature was plummeting and the world around her was a relentless enemy. Her head, heavy with fatigue, sagged and she felt her vision blur. Desperation clawed at her insides, her survival instincts at war with the overwhelming urge to succumb to the cold. She needed help, but from where? A soft sound broke the silence, so faint she thought it might have been the wind. Her antennae twitched, struggling to detect the source. Then, as if the universe had answered her last plea, she saw a figure on the horizon. It was small, humanoid, moving steadily across the dunes, its body wrapped in heavy clothing, obscured from her full view by the snowstorm. For a moment she thought it was a mirage, a fleeting illusion created by her deteriorating mind. But then the figure grew larger, more solid, and she realized it was real. The Queen Mother's heart, or what passed for a heart in her species, skipped a beat. A human. The humanoid creature approached with slow, deliberate steps, unconcerned with the biting cold that had nearly drained her of life. As the figure drew closer, she could make out its features, rough and rugged, yet strangely comforting. The human was strong, a towering figure wrapped in layers of protective clothing, with a face hidden beneath a mask and goggles. In its hands it carried a thick bundle, perhaps of supplies or tools. Her mind flickered with disbelief. Humans. What were they doing on this cursed world? They were barely more than an irritant in the grand scheme of the galaxy. But they were resilient, and many species had underestimated them before. Her instincts screamed at her to protect herself, to fight, to defend her place in the universe. But as the human drew closer, she could sense something she hadn't anticipated: compassion. The human knelt beside her, its breath visible in the freezing air. The creature's gloved hand reached out slowly, gently touching her wounded form. She recoiled instinctively, but the human did not withdraw. Instead, it spoke softly, its voice muffled through the thick fabric of its mask. "You're hurt," the human said, its tone calm but filled with concern. The Queen Mother's mind swirled with confusion. Why would this fragile creature care for her? Why would it risk its own life to approach an alien, let alone a queen of an insectoid species? The human moved with surprising gentleness, unwrapping a bundle of cloth from its pack and laying it over her injured body, trying to shield her from the cruel cold. For the first time since the crash, the Queen Mother felt warmth, a fleeting sense of comfort amidst the endless ice. But her body was too weak. Her thoughts blurred, and she could feel the edges of consciousness slipping away from her. The human's voice echoed distantly. "Stay with me. I'll help you." Despite the impossibility of the situation, the Queen Mother found herself clinging to those words. Was this mercy? Was this compassion? The human was speaking as though it knew the meaning of kindness, a concept her people had long since abandoned in the pursuit of survival. The notion that a human would offer such care seemed absurd, and yet it was happening. Her vision faded and the darkness closed in, but in the distance she thought she heard the human's voice again, a promise she could not understand. The first touch of mercy ***. The Queen Mother's world was consumed by darkness as she lost consciousness. She had no way of knowing how much time had passed. For all she knew, the human had abandoned her, leaving her to die in the harsh desert. The thought tugged at her fading awareness, but she was too weak to protest. But when her senses finally began to stir again, it was to the warmth of a fire and the gentle rhythmic sound of breathing. The air was no longer bitter with ice, but instead carried the faint scent of wood smoke and something else, something distinctly earthy. The warmth of the fire on her broken body was more than physical. It was as if the fire itself had breathed life back into her. Her eyes flickered open, though everything was blurred, the shapes around her distorted. She tried to focus, to make sense of what she was seeing, but it took a few moments before the scene around her came into focus. She was no longer in the frozen waste. The snowstorm had passed, and she now found herself sheltered in what appeared to be a cave, the walls lined with furs and scraps of cloth. The human was sitting nearby, its back turned to her, focused on the fire. She could feel the warmth of her own body returning, the ache in her limbs slowly easing as the human's care worked its way through her broken form. The queen shifted slightly, trying to rise, but her body still resisted, her limbs trembling with weakness. The fire crackled as the human turned, sensing her movement. "You're awake," the human said, its voice rough but filled with genuine relief. It knelt down beside her, moving carefully as though afraid to startle her. The Queen Mother studied the human with renewed curiosity. She could not yet understand the depth of its actions, why it had cared for her, why it had risked its life in this desolate wasteland. The human's face was still mostly obscured by its thick mask, but its eyes, dark, focused, and full of an emotion the Queen Mother had never expected from a creature of its kind, met hers with quiet intensity. They seemed to radiate an unspoken understanding, as if the human had known she was far more than a simple alien to be destroyed. She studied the human's hands as they moved to adjust the layers of cloth around her body. The care was strange to her. Her people had no such concept of gentle healing, of soothing touch. In the hive, there was only survival, only the harsh drive to dominate and thrive. But here, in this alien place, her instincts were battling against the overwhelming sense of gratitude that rose inside her. Her antennae quivered. What had happened to the fierce, untamable creature she had been? The human spoke again, its voice softer this time. "I'm going to help you heal. I don't know if you understand me, but I'll make sure you get back to your people." Her heart fluttered at the mention of her hive. She could not remember how long it had been since her crash. Days. Weeks. Was anyone left to care for her people? The thought gnawed at her, but she forced it down. Survival first. She had to recover, and quickly. Her species was built to endure hardship, but this world, this wasteland, was not one they had ever encountered. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry, and the words caught in her mouth, as if the very effort of forming them would drain the last of her strength. The human seemed to sense her struggle. With surprising dexterity, it produced a small container and uncorked it, holding it to her mouth. "Here. Drink." She hesitated. What was this? She could smell it faintly, a medicinal herb mixed with something else, something sweet. It wasn't harmful. Cautiously she accepted the liquid, allowing it to trickle down her parched throat. The effect was immediate. Warmth flooded her insides and the pain in her chest began to ease. Her limbs, though still stiff, began to respond to her commands once more. The human watched her closely, as though expecting her to collapse at any moment. But the Queen Mother's instincts kicked in. She was not weak. She was not broken. She would rise. "I know it's hard," the human said, its voice surprisingly tender. "But you'll get through this." The Queen Mother's mind reeled. Art. She had conquered entire worlds. She had seen empires fall, her enemies reduced to ash beneath her feet. But now she felt as though she was something else entirely, something small, something fragile. This human's kindness, its unwavering resolve to help her, stirred something deep within her. It was not weakness, no, this was something else. This was a strength she had never known. Her antennae twitched as she struggled to sit up. The human didn't try to stop her. Instead, it reached for a blanket, draping it over her shoulders with practiced ease. She hadn't expected to need comfort from a human, but it was there, wrapped around her like a soft, warm cocoon. The Queen Mother's gaze softened, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to trust. She didn't understand how or why this human had chosen to save her, but there was something genuine in its eyes that told her it was no mere act of pity. The human had seen something in her, a survivor, perhaps, or a queen deserving of respect. Her mind raced. Could she still fulfill her purpose? Could she recover quickly enough to return to her people, to rebuild the hive, to reign as she had before? The strength within her was still present, though buried beneath the layers of exhaustion. She was a queen, a force to be reckoned with, but this world was unlike anything she had ever known. The human didn't speak again for a long while. Instead, it continued to tend to her injuries, checking her wounds with care, making sure she was warm and comfortable. The quiet companionship was unlike anything the Queen Mother had ever experienced. She had never known another being to show such a willingness to help without expectation of anything in return. Eventually, the Queen Mother's mind settled, and the firelight danced in her eyes. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why do you help me?" The human looked at her for a long moment, its eyes filled with something that she could not name. Then it spoke simply, as though the answer was self-evident. "The strength and kindness ****. The Queen Mother had never been one to question strength. She had ruled with it, commanding her hive with an iron will. Her species valued power, the ability to control, to dominate, to protect, to lead. Kindness, compassion, these were foreign concepts in her world, dismissed as weaknesses that hindered survival. In the hive, emotions were tools of control, not virtues to be cherished. Yet as she lay there in the warmth of the cave, her senses alive with the sound of the crackling fire and the steady rhythm of the human's breathing, she found herself unable to dismiss the one emotion that had so thoroughly taken root in her mind: gratitude. She had never expected a human, one of the smallest, most fragile species in the galaxy, to be the one to show her the mercy she had so often denied to others. "Because you're worth it." The human's words echoed in her mind long after it had spoken them. The simplicity of the statement left her stunned. Worth it? The idea was almost laughable. What value could a queen, a conqueror of worlds, possibly see in herself? Her species had long defined themselves by their dominance, their fearsome strength, and yet, in this moment, surrounded by the remains of her shattered body, she realized how fragile she truly was. But as much as she wanted to reject it, something in the human's eyes, its unwavering gaze, compelled her to understand. The human saw something in her that she hadn't seen in herself for a long time: the potential to survive, to rebuild, to rise again. Not because of her power, but because of something deeper. She shifted again, more steadily this time, and pushed herself into a sitting position. The human immediately moved to support her, placing a steadying hand beneath her arm. Her antennae flicked in surprise at the softness of the touch, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed the human to help her, her mind focused on the strange sense of calm that seemed to settle over her, even as her body ached with every movement. "How long have I been here?" she asked, her voice still rough from disuse. Her thoughts were foggy, and the weight of the world outside the cave pressed on her. The human paused, its face unreadable beneath the mask, before answering, 5 days? 5 days. She had been unconscious for that long, her body broken and her will shattered by the brutal cold of the desert. The thought of what could have happened to her hive in that time left a hollow ache deep inside her, one that could not be soothed by the fire or the human's care. "We need to get to my ship," the Queen Mother said, her voice firmer now. The fire, the human's presence, it had revived her. She felt it now, the stirrings of her old self. "I need to reach my people." The human didn't argue. Instead, it nodded, its gaze never leaving her. It was as though it understood the gravity of her words, even though it had no knowledge of her hive, her people, or the vast responsibility she carried on her shoulders. "We'll get there," the human said simply, its voice filled with quiet conviction. "But we'll do it slowly. You're not fully healed yet." The Queen Mother nodded, a brief flash of irritation flickering within her. She didn't have time for slow. Time was a luxury she couldn't afford. But as much as her instincts screamed for her to move, to push forward, she knew the human was right. She wasn't in any condition to rush. She could barely stand without assistance. The human began to prepare their journey. It moved with surprising efficiency, gathering supplies, packing up the remnants of their makeshift camp. The Queen Mother watched, her mind whirling with thoughts of her hive and the state of her people. Her disappearance, her crash, her injuries, could they survive without her? What if her hive had already been destroyed? What if they were already under the heel of the invader who had forced her into this position in the first place? The human turned back to her, its movements cautious, as though waiting for a signal. "You ready?" it asked. The Queen Mother hesitated, her antennae twitching with indecision. She was not ready. But she would never be ready, not until she stood before her people again. And there was only one way to reach them. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "Let's go." With the human's help, she staggered to her feet, her limbs trembling beneath her weight. For a moment she thought she might collapse again, but the human was right there, supporting her. She could feel the warmth of its hands on her, its strength a silent promise that she was not alone. It was a strange feeling to rely on another being, especially one so small and fragile compared to her own imposing stature. They moved slowly, the human leading the way as they left the cave. The landscape outside had changed, the storm having passed, leaving the desert eerily still. The ground was covered in patches of frost and snow, the wind still biting but no longer as fierce as it had been before. The Queen Mother felt the cold once again, but this time she could bear it. The human had given her a taste of something she had long forgotten: hope. As they trudged across the frozen desert, the Queen Mother tried to focus on the path ahead, but her mind was too distracted. The journey felt endless, each step heavy with the burden of uncertainty. The human said little, its focus entirely on the task at hand, but its presence was a constant reassurance, a steady anchor in the midst of her storm. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a rocky outcrop that overlooked a narrow valley. The human stopped, scanning the horizon. The Queen Mother looked down into the valley below, her sharp eyes catching a glimpse of something in the distance. An object, small but unmistakable. Her heart skipped. It was her ship. "Is that it?" the human asked, its voice quiet but filled with awe. The Queen Mother's gaze never wavered. "Yes," she said, her voice tight with relief. "That's it." The human nodded, a brief flicker of determination crossing its face. "We're almost there. Stay with me." The Queen Mother didn't answer. Instead, she pushed herself forward, her legs carrying her faster now, despite the exhaustion still creeping at the edges of her strength. She had one goal now, one singular focus: the ship. Her hive. Her people. And the human, strangely, impossibly, was right beside her, walking with her every step of the way. They were not alone anymore. Not in this fight. Not in the universe that had once been a cold, empty place for her. And for the first time since her crash, she realized that perhaps, just perhaps, the true strength of a queen was not in her power to dominate, but in her ability to accept help, to allow others to walk beside her. A queen's resolve ***. The ship was closer now, the outlines of its broken hull sharp against the icy blue sky. The Queen Mother could feel the tension in her muscles, the anticipation coiling tighter with every step. The ship, her ship, lay nestled in the valley below like a forgotten relic of a past she hadn't been able to protect. The human beside her moved without hesitation, its gait steady, a silent promise to help her reach her destination. The Queen Mother felt a surge of frustration, a familiar anger rising in her chest. She had been betrayed, stranded, her hive broken. She had been weakened by the crash, and yet here she was, walking slowly, dependent on a human for support, a human who should have been a mere speck in the vast universe. But this human had shown her kindness, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized how deeply it had impacted her. Her hive had no place for kindness. It was a place of survival, of calculated strategy. Her species had long traded empathy for efficiency, emotion for strength. Yet here, with this fragile, resourceful human, she was learning a new kind of power, one that demanded patience, cooperation, and trust. How much further? The human's voice broke through her thoughts. The Queen Mother glanced at the rocky outcrop, then down at the ship. "Not far," she answered, her voice tight but determined. "We'll make it." The human didn't respond, but there was a brief flash of something that looked like hope, across its face. It gave her a small nod as if acknowledging her resolve. They continued their trek down the rocky slope, the path growing steeper. Her broken body screamed with every movement, but she held herself upright, willing herself to endure. She couldn't afford weakness, not now. Not when the chance to reclaim her place in the universe was within reach. The ship had been designed for war. Its sleek, insectoid design reflected the strength and precision of her people. The thick hull, reinforced for deep space combat, had been torn apart in the crash. The damage was severe but not beyond repair, at least not with her advanced knowledge of technology. The Queen Mother had survived far worse situations, and she had no intention of failing now. As they reached the valley floor, the human finally spoke again. "There's no one here," it observed, its voice quieter now, as if sensing her growing unease. "Is your crew gone?" The question hit her harder than she expected. She had not allowed herself to think about her crew, her people. She had to believe that some of them had survived, that the hive was still fighting. But the cold reality of the wreckage before her gave her pause. No signs of life, no wreckage from other ships, no footprints in the snow. "I don't know," she answered, her voice thick with the weight of her uncertainty. "I can't be sure until we get inside." The human didn't press her further. It simply moved forward, its steps confident as it led her toward the ship. The Queen Mother's sharp eyes scanned the perimeter, her antennae twitching with subtle alarm. Something wasn't right. The cold emptiness of the landscape around them felt too still, too silent. As they reached the hull, the Queen Mother forced herself to focus. The human turned toward her, nodding to a small access hatch in the side of the ship. It was sealed, but the human seemed prepared. It produced a small tool from its pack, a device that looked primitive compared to the Queen Mother's technology, but it worked nonetheless. The human worked quickly, its movements smooth and practiced. The hatch clicked open with a soft hiss, and the Queen Mother could feel the faint vibrations of the ship's system struggling to come back online. The human stepped aside, giving her a clear path inside. "After you," it said, its voice soft but with an underlying strength. The Queen Mother hesitated for only a moment before entering. She had no idea what awaited her inside. The interior was dark, the lights flickering erratically, but it was still her ship. Her senses adjusted quickly, and she felt a surge of familiarity as she moved through the wreckage. Her command center was just ahead, but the way was blocked by debris. Without thinking, the Queen Mother moved toward the wreckage. She had no time to waste, no patience for obstacles. The human followed, seemingly unfazed by the mess. Together they worked to clear the debris, the Queen Mother using what little strength she had left and the human providing steady, if limited, support. When they finally cleared the last of the debris, the Queen Mother stepped into the command center. It was as she feared. The walls were scarred, the terminals shattered, and the central command panel was entirely offline. She rushed to the control station, her antennae twitching in agitation. The human hovered behind her, watching her movements closely, sensing her frustration. "Can you fix it?" it asked quietly. The Queen Mother hesitated. She could repair it, but it would take time. Time she didn't have. She scanned the broken systems, her antennae flitting across the terminals. The energy reserves were minimal, the ship's auxiliary systems barely functional. The hive would need communication, but the ship's long-range transmission system had been damaged in the crash. "I can repair it," she said, her voice strained with the effort of staying calm. "But it will take too long. We need to find another way to contact my people." She turned to the human, her eyes narrowing. "Where is your ship? Can it assist?" The human's expression was unreadable, but it took a deep breath, as if the question weighed heavier than she expected. "I don't know," the human said finally. "I didn't expect to be out here for so long. I was in a wreck myself before I found you." The Queen Mother was silent for a long moment. Her mind raced. She had no way of knowing how far she was from the nearest friendly human outpost. The crash site had been a random chance, an isolated desert far from any other human-controlled systems. The human had helped her, but in the grand scheme of things, it was just as stranded as she was. But that wasn't important right now. They still had a chance to send a distress signal. She turned back to the command center, her mind already calculating the quickest repairs. She could reroute some of the power from the secondary systems to the long-range transmitter, but it would be a gamble. If the signal didn't reach far enough, they would be stuck here, waiting for rescue that might never come. "Help me," she ordered, her voice firm. "Reboot the auxiliary power grid." The human didn't hesitate. It moved quickly, assisting her as best it could, following her instructions with surprising accuracy. The Queen Mother watched it with a new understanding. It wasn't just a fragile creature. It was a survivor, adaptable and capable. This human had its own strength, one born not of physical might, but of resilience and determination. As they worked together, the Queen Mother allowed herself to think of her people again. They would find her. They would rebuild. She couldn't let them down. The ship's systems hummed to life as they managed to restore auxiliary power. The long-range transmitter flickered, its screen pulsing with static. "We're ready," the human said, stepping back as the Queen Mother pressed the final button. The signal was set. The shadow of doubt ***. The long-range transmitter crackled to life, but the Queen Mother's relief was short-lived. The faint static on the screen was all she could hear, her antennae twitching in agitation as she studied the flickering signal. They had done everything they could, but even the most advanced technology couldn't overcome the vast distances of space without a little luck, and luck had never been her ally. The human, standing beside her, noticed her expression. Its face was still obscured by the mask, but its posture, slightly hunched, alert, spoke volumes. The human could sense her growing tension. It wasn't just the uncertainty of the situation, but the gnawing doubt that had slowly crept into her thoughts since they first reached the ship. "Will they answer?" the human asked, its voice low, unsure. The Queen Mother didn't answer immediately. She focused on the faint blips on the terminal. The signal was weak, struggling to break through the interference from the atmosphere and the damaged ship systems. She tapped a series of keys trying to improve the signal strength, but it was no use. This ship was crippled and the systems were too far gone to salvage. No, she finally said, her voice steady though tinged with frustration. It may take time. Or the signal may never reach my people at all. The human didn't flinch at the news, though the quiet despair in its eyes didn't go unnoticed. The Queen Mother glanced at the small human, its body so fragile compared to her own. She had always seen humans as insignificant, small creatures scurrying through the vastness of the universe, destined to fade into oblivion. But now, here, in this moment of doubt, it was clear that the human was far more than just a fleeting distraction in her grand plans. Then what do we do now? The human asked, its voice steady, as though it had already accepted that they would need to find another solution. For a moment, the Queen Mother was silent, her mind racing. She had always been a leader, a conqueror, accustomed to making decisions swiftly and decisively. But this situation was different. She was no longer in control of the vast, unyielding armies of her hive. She was a queen stranded on an alien world, helpless for the first time in her life. She hated it. We wait, she said quietly. We wait and we hope the signal reaches. But we don't stop preparing for the worst. The human nodded, accepting her command without question. For the first time since they had met, the Queen Mother felt a flicker of respect for the creature. It didn't hesitate. It didn't question her authority. It simply acted, trusted her, and moved forward. Perhaps the strength she had dismissed for so long was real after all. The human turned toward the scattered remains of the ship's supplies. It moved to the crate where food rations were stored and began sorting through them. The Queen Mother watched it, her sharp eyes tracking every movement. There was an almost surgical precision to the way the human worked, as if it had been through this kind of survival situation before. Do you have enough to last? The Queen Mother asked, her voice quiet. The human paused, glancing back at her. We'll make it last, it said simply. We have enough for a few weeks if we ration carefully. But we'll need to find more eventually. Food, water, we can't rely on the ship forever. The Queen Mother's antennae flicked in irritation. She was accustomed to abundance, to the vast resources of her hive. This deprivation was discomforting. The human's plan was pragmatic, sensible even, but it was a far cry from the certainty she had once known. Her survival was not supposed to depend on rationing. Still she nodded. Then we will need to scout the area. There may be resources nearby we can use. She stepped away from the control station, making her way to the entrance of the ship. Her body still ached, her movements stiff, but the will to push through was stronger than the physical limitations that held her back. The human followed her, and together, they ventured out into the cold expanse of the desert once more. The sun was low on the horizon now, casting a long shadow over the icy terrain. The wind had picked up again, whipping through the valley and sending a chill through the air. The Queen Mother's breath formed clouds as she exhaled, but she barely noticed. She was focused on the horizon, scanning the vast emptiness for any sign of life. There's nothing, she muttered, more to herself than to the human. No sign of another ship, no wreckage. This world is as barren as it seems. The human said nothing but kept walking beside her, its eyes alert as it scanned the surroundings. The Queen Mother could feel its presence at her side, a quiet reassurance. The human had shown no fear of the vast desert, no hesitation in the face of the unknown. But she knew that fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. They were both far from home, both struggling to survive. We should return to the ship, the Queen Mother said after a moment. It's too dangerous out here to waste energy. The human nodded and turned back, but before they reached the ship, something caught the Queen Mother's attention. A faint flicker on the horizon, barely perceptible, like the movement of a shadow in the distance. Her antennae twitched and her sharp eyes narrowed. Wait, she hissed, stopping in her tracks. The human froze beside her, its head turning toward her with a questioning look. What is it? I saw something, the Queen Mother replied, her voice low. A movement. Someone, or something, is out there. The human's face hardened behind its mask, and it immediately crouched down, pulling a small scanning device from its pack. It activated the device, and the tiny screen lit up with a series of unreadable symbols. What are you seeing? The Queen Mother asked, her voice tight with urgency. The human's fingers worked quickly, tapping at the device's interface. It frowned, its eyes darting between the screen and the horizon. There's a signal, the human said finally, its voice tense. A faint one. It could be another ship or someone trying to communicate. The Queen Mother's heart surged with hope, but she knew better than to let it cloud her judgment. A faint signal could mean anything. Could be a trap, a lure to draw them in. But it could also mean salvation. "We need to investigate," the Queen Mother said, her voice low but filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "It could be my people." The human nodded, its expression unreadable behind the mask. "Let's go." Together, they set off in the direction of the signal, the cold desert stretching out before them like a vast, unforgiving ocean. The Queen Mother pushed forward, her every instinct urging her to move faster. She had no idea what they were walking into, but she couldn't afford to waste another moment. Her hive, her people, and even her survival depended on this moment. They walked in silence, the only sound their footsteps crunching through the snow, the faint wind whispering in their ears. The closer they got to the source of the signal, the more the Queen Mother's mind raced. Was it truly her people? Was it a rescue party? Or was it something else? The encounter ***. The signal grew stronger with every step, the faint flicker on the horizon becoming a steady pulse that tugged at the Queen Mother's senses. Her antennae twitched, each small adjustment of her body reacting instinctively to the pull of this unknown force. She could feel the tension building as they trudged through the snow-covered desert, the ground beneath them growing firmer as they neared their destination. But the further they went, the more unsettling the silence became. There was something unnervingly still about the landscape. The wind had quieted, the cold biting and sharp but without the usual whistling howls that filled the void of most alien deserts. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Her own heart seemed to beat louder in her chest, each thump reverberating in her body, reminding her of how vulnerable she felt out here, far from home, from her hive, surrounded by nothing but snow and barren rock. Beside her, the human moved without a sound, its movements swift and cautious. It held the scanning device close, watching it intently. Every now and then, the human would glance up at the horizon, its face half concealed by the mask but still showing the strain of uncertainty. The Queen Mother didn't need to ask how it was feeling. The unease was palpable. But despite the fear they both shared, there was a quiet determination in the way the human walked, a drive to press forward no matter what. The signal was coming from a cluster of rocks up ahead. The Queen Mother's sharp eyes picked out the jagged peaks in the distance, almost imperceptible in the whiteness of the landscape. She nodded to the human, signaling for them to move faster. It was there, just ahead, and they couldn't afford to waste any more time. The closer they got, the more the Queen Mother's instincts screamed that something was wrong. Her antennae flicked with a warning, sending out vibrations through the air. She halted for a moment, scanning the surroundings. There was no movement, no sign of anything that might have caused the signal, yet the pulsing was undeniable. It was coming from the rocks, a series of steep cliffs just beyond a small valley. "Stay close," she ordered the human in a whisper, her voice barely audible over the increasing silence. The human nodded, tightening its grip on the scanning device. Its eyes were sharp, alert. Together, they advanced toward the rocks, the weight of the unknown pressing on their shoulders. The Queen Mother could sense the human's rising tension, though it said nothing. It was as if the very air was thickening with every step they took, an unspoken warning that this was not the simple rescue they had hoped for. When they reached the base of the cliff, the signal abruptly stopped. The sudden silence hit the Queen Mother like a physical blow. She felt it deep in her bones, a freezing chill that crawled up her spine. Her antennae twitched in confusion. The pulse she had been tracking had vanished, leaving behind only the unsettling emptiness of the desert. "What happened?" the human asked, its voice barely a whisper. The Queen Mother's gaze locked on the rocks in front of her. She could see nothing but jagged stone and the faintest traces of shifting shadows. Something wasn't right. Her antennae flared, sending out a probing wave of energy, but all she could sense was the stillness of the world around them. "Stay alert," she murmured, her voice tense. She moved toward the rock face, her every sense on high alert. The human followed her, the tension between them thickening. As they neared the cliff's edge, the Queen Mother froze, her eyes narrowing. She could feel something, no, someone, was watching them. Her instincts screamed at her to turn, to run, but her body remained still, poised to strike if needed. And then it happened. From behind the rock, a figure emerged. It was a being the Queen Mother had never seen before. A humanoid creature, tall and clad in a strange, sleek suit that seemed to shimmer against the backdrop of the snow. The figure's face was obscured by a helmet, but the glowing, ethereal lights that pulsed across its armor gave it an almost otherworldly presence. The human next to her stiffened, its hand instinctively reaching for a weapon she knew it carried, though it made no move to attack. The Queen Mother instinctively stepped forward, her posture regal, her antennae twitching in a threatening manner. Despite her weariness, her instinct was clear. She would not show weakness. Not now. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice cold but firm. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it tilted its head as though studying them. The Queen Mother's antennae flicked again, sensing no immediate threat, but the air around them was thick with something else, curiosity perhaps. The figure didn't move forward or retreat. It simply watched. Not hostile, a voice finally echoed, but it wasn't the figure speaking. The voice came from within the helmet itself, the words almost robotic in their precision. "We come in peace." The Queen Mother's eyes narrowed. "Peace?" she repeated, the word tasting strange on her tongue. Peace was not something she had ever embraced. It was a weakness, a luxury for those who couldn't afford to be ruthless. But she could sense no immediate danger. The figure's stance was passive, its weapon, if it carried one, was hidden beneath the armor. The human beside her took a tentative step forward. "Who are you?" it asked, its voice steady but filled with uncertainty. The figure didn't answer immediately. The Queen Mother's patience was wearing thin, but before she could demand an answer again, the figure raised a gloved hand, signaling for silence. "I am Exelon," the figure said finally. "We are explorers. We have been tracking your distress signal." The Queen Mother's brow furrowed. "Explorers?" she repeated, her voice laced with suspicion. "You are not human." Exelon's helmet shifted slightly, as if in acknowledgement of her observation. "No. We are not human. We are called the Kylan. We have traveled far from our home, seeking knowledge, seeking to aid those in need." The Queen Mother's mind raced. Kylan. She had heard whispers of them, but the stories were vague, just rumors among her people. They were elusive, mysterious, and many considered them a myth. And now here they were, standing before her in the middle of an icy desert, claiming to be allies. "What is it you want?" the Queen Mother demanded, her voice sharp. She would not allow herself to be manipulated. Not by these strangers. Not by anyone. Exelon's helmet tilted again, its voice calm yet undeniably otherworldly. "What we want," it said, "is to help you. We can offer what you need to survive. Your signal was faint, but we traced it here. We can assist you in sending your message and repairing your ship. We can help you rebuild." The Queen Mother hesitated, her mind swirling with thoughts. It made sense. Their technology was far beyond what humans, or her people, had ever seen. But why would they offer help? What was their true intention? Could they be trusted? The human at her side spoke, its voice cautious. "How do we know you're not just here to take advantage of us?" Exelon's voice was steady, almost serene. "We are not conquerors. We seek knowledge, not dominion. We do not wish to take anything from you. We only wish to help." The Queen Mother studied the figure before her, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her. In her lifetime she had faced countless dangers, countless threats, but this one was different. The Kylan were a wild card, a powerful, enigmatic force that could either be a saving grace or an overwhelming storm. Her decision would define everything. The price of salvation ***. The cold wind howled as the Queen Mother and the human followed the Kylan, Exelon, into the hidden base nestled within the jagged cliffs. The sharp rock formations cast long shadows, and the closer they got to the entrance, the more the Queen Mother could sense the strange hum of alien technology. Her antennae flicked, alert to the subtle vibrations in the air, the unmistakable signs of advanced machinery at work. Exelon led the way with a calm grace, its form barely visible against the backdrop of the snow. Despite the apparent peace in its movements, the Queen Mother could sense the calculated wariness in the alien's every step. There was no trust yet. She could feel it. This tenuous alliance was still fragile, and the Kylan had no intention of offering help without expecting something in return. The human walked silently beside her, its eyes darting between the strange surroundings and the alien figure leading them. There was an unspoken understanding between them now. Survival came first. They had no choice but to follow Exelon, for they had no better options, no other resources. But something about the Kylan's serene demeanor unsettled her. They were too composed, too perfect. The human at least had the decency to feel a flicker of uncertainty, but the Queen Mother didn't allow herself such luxuries. She had to remain focused. She was still the Queen Mother, and nothing could change that, not even in this strange, desolate place. As they passed through the narrow entrance of the base, the harsh winds outside were replaced with a suffocating warmth, the air thick with the hum of advanced machinery. The walls were lined with sleek panels that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, lights flickering in soft hues of blue and violet. The Queen Mother's antennae twitched as they passed through a series of doors, their footfalls muffled by the smooth metallic floor. Inside, they were led into a spacious chamber, far larger than any human or insectoid construction the Queen Mother had ever encountered. The room itself was a labyrinth of corridors, each one filled with strange devices and unknown symbols. The air smelled faintly of metal and something unfamiliar, something that made the hairs on the Queen Mother's neck stand on end. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it was as if the very atmosphere of this place held secrets she wasn't ready to uncover. Exelon turned to face them as they entered the heart of the chamber, its posture relaxed but its voice still carrying an air of authority. "We can repair your ship," it said simply, "but it will take time. You will need to assist us. The process is not as simple as it may seem." The Queen Mother stepped forward, her antennae flicking with interest. "What do you require of us?" she asked, her voice laced with both curiosity and a note of caution. Exelon paused before speaking again, its tone almost unreadable. "In return for our assistance there is a price. You must help us gather information, knowledge about the stars, the creatures that roam this galaxy and most importantly, the technology of your kind. The knowledge you hold is valuable to us." The Queen Mother's eyes narrowed. "Knowledge?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "You want us to serve as your spies?" Exelon tilted its head, its helmet reflecting the soft glow of the base's lights. "Not spies, Queen Mother. Partners. You have much to offer, and we wish to understand the full scope of your people's abilities. Your technology. Your biology. The power of your hive." The Queen Mother's mind raced. She had never seen herself as anyone's partner, let alone a partner to these alien beings. Her hive was all that mattered. Everything else was secondary. And yet, here she was, relying on the mercy of these Kylan to survive. "You will have your answer once our ship is operational," she said firmly, her voice cold and commanding. "We will assist you, but only to the extent that it serves our survival." Exelon's helmet dipped in what seemed to be acknowledgement. "Fair enough. We will begin immediately. But be aware, what you are offering us is not without cost. There is always a price, even if you don't see it at first." The Queen Mother didn't flinch at the implication. She was no stranger to bargaining, to weighing the value of every action, every alliance. Survival was the ultimate goal, and if the Kylan could offer the means to that end, then she would play their game for now. Exelon gestured for them to follow and led them to a central platform, a massive structure that hummed with energy. It was unlike anything the Queen Mother had ever seen before. The platform was surrounded by intricate machinery, cables snaking across the floor and walls, all connected to a central core that seemed to pulse with energy. It was a work of advanced technology far beyond the crude ships of her hive. "The core of your ship will be recharged here," Exelon explained, "but we need your cooperation. The interface between your species' technology and ours is complex. The energies are not compatible in their current form." The Queen Mother stepped forward, studying the machinery with a mix of curiosity and caution. "And what do you require of us to make it compatible?" Exelon's voice softened. "We need biological data. Genetic material. It will allow us to integrate your ship's systems with ours, to link the power of your species to our technology. We will also need." Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.